Welcome, everyone, to the latest Detroit Lions Lone Wolves podcast. I'm the Doc, John Macaroon. As you can see, joining me, my guy, Jeff Iafrady, Crunch Time Sports, doing great things across the digital airwaves. Check him out on YouTube, daily, nightly broadcasts, even venturing into the daytime with the Mock Draft Mondays. Jeff, it's a good time to be talking about the Detroit Lions ahead of the draft. I'm very curious now to get your sense. I know you're paying attention to a lot of things that are happening with the pre-draft visits, a lot of, interesting names popping up. We're going to talk about, a lot of those names, who could fit, who could benefit this team. But I want to start with this, all right, because it's very interesting. Now, from your vantage point, because I know you're paying attention to this football team as they go from a good team, a team that can get to the postseason, to a football team that can take the next step, take a leap from being a perennial playoff team to being a team that can win a Super Bowl. So now heading into the draft, what are the Lions' needs? Do you think the top three needs for Brad Holmes to try and add to this football team via the draft?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with the layup. It's clearly pass rushers. And the Zadarius Smith stuff's been interesting. I know Brad's still been in contact with him, but when you look at just the NFC, and you can even say the AFC, but just the NFC, the Rams last year gave the Eagles the toughest fight. They did. And the thing the Rams did very well in the postseason was get after the quarterback. And they did that with some of their young players that they found not just in round one with Jared Verse, but round 1, 2, 3, and beyond. They've done a really good job drafting defensive linemen. And I think with Aiden being back off of that significant injury, I'm not worried about him. I'm not as concerned about Aleem either, even though it'll take some time. DJ, we know what he brings. It's really the other spot. It's Marcus Davenport. And I think he has, if you look at guys on the team, he's up there for most to prove. Can he get back to what he was in New Orleans, what the Lions saw in him when they first brought him on? But I think when you look at what they should prioritize in the draft, it's got to be edge. And I know Brad doesn't operate under what they need, but when you look at a class that is this deep with defensive linemen, the same year you need a defensive lineman, in a year you expect to win the Super Bowl, it's like the stars are aligning for them to go out and take one, I would assume, within the first 2 rounds. But besides that, you got to look at the guard spot, John, especially with Graham. I think he's another guy, speaking of guys that have a lot to prove. Graham last year coming off a pretty rough year, and he's not getting any younger. You found Mahogany, who's your future starter. He's on a rookie deal. But this is another class where you're going to have some really good guards taken in the first 2 rounds. I mean, Gray Zabel, you have Tyler Booker, Donovan Jackson. You could keep going throughout the entire draft. So I think those two, for me, are the top 2 needs for the Lions for the future. And then you could start looking at other positions like safety, wide receiver. You can go through maybe defensive tackle if Aleem's not going to be there right away. There's other things you can debate, but those 2, edge and guard, to me, John, the biggest and most important needs for the Lions. Although Brad doesn't draft on needs always, but that's the truth.
When you look at a lot of the early mock drafts, the mock drafts that you've put out, there's been a combination of edge rusher first in the first round or offensive lineman. So you get a sense of, okay, people understand the 2 biggest needs. Yep. If it was up to you, what would you prioritize? If you're looking at this draft, you're sitting, you're watching, you're going to be probably live streaming everything going on that night of the draft. What do you want to see? Do you want to see them fill the need along the offensive line, or do you want them to address the edge rusher position with the very first pick at number 28?
I think the preference for me is trade up and get a premier edge. I think everyone would be probably on the same. Everyone would be on board with that. But I'm starting, as we get closer to the draft, I think a more of a possibility, in my opinion, would be trading back potentially. I mean, you look at some of the guys here from 28 to 30, 40, there's going to be a similar tier of players that you can go and get. And we know Brad, usually it's trade up in drafts. He does that often. So I wouldn't be shocked if he trades up and goes and gets someone he really likes. They met with Shamar Stewart. That's a name you probably want to keep an eye out on. But let's say there is a James Pearce. I would love for them, personally, although he doesn't fit, it's all preference, would love for them to take an edge in the first round, because I still believe, I think edge, you can argue the first round guys to the second round guys, even though they're similar, there's a little bit of a drop off, but I think there'll be a bunch of really good guards in round 2. So I would go edge and then guard, trade up for an edge, preferably.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the sentiment of a lot of fans. I think that they want to see, that's been their focus. The big
Right.
priority is edge rusher. But I could also see them. You see Gray Zabel's name quite a bit. You see a lot of offensive linemen early because of the need, and especially with how important that spot is. You saw what Graham Glasgow was able to do. So I could see where people would understand, like, hey, if there's a swing tackle that potentially could play guard, versatile, that could add depth, I could see them going, definitely targeting the trenches. That is something that probably is the odds-on favorite as to what could happen. And you make good points. They could trade back for more capital later on because there is depth. That's what's going to make this draft fascinating, is that the Lions could legitimately this year do all three. They could move up, they could stay at 28, or they could, and you can make arguments for all three to potentially trade back. But now, as the draft approaches, there's a sentiment now based on what we learned at the owners meeting as well. And you heard what Dan Campbell said at the draft, talking about needing to get younger at wide receiver. We're going to talk about a visit that's potentially scheduled for next week with a player, but let's talk about this legitimately, because you've seen Brad Holmes hear the whole world say, hey, you got to focus on defense. And then who did he go and make an aggressive move for? Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yes.
And he was willing to spark a nationwide debate about the value of running back. Should you have made a move for Jahmyr Gibbs at that spot that you took him in? So, and Brad Holmes has said it basically in our face. He said, we are not a needs-based drafting team. If there's a top-end wide receiver, maybe the one from Ohio State that's been taking all the visits as well, do you see any scenario in which Brad Holmes goes off the board, shocks everybody, and goes with a skill position player, running back, wide receiver, tight end? I mean, tight end's long shot, but do you see them going for a skill position on offense, most notably at wide receiver at 28, if one of the top wide receivers does fall?
I will say this, because we actually were screaming at each other yesterday, and Booner was saying, which we all agree, and you just brought it up, we don't know what Brad's going to do. Okay, so we can't just act like, Brad would never take a wide receiver. None of us have a clue what he's going to do. But if I can't lie to you, Doc. If I'm there on draft night, we're going to be live. And I know you'll be ready. Everyone will be just waiting to hear the pick. If it's a wide receiver, I would sit there probably in awe and shock, and then have to recollect my thoughts. I would be frustrated, even though I completely understand. It's like knowing what could happen, but still being upset with the result. I know it could happen, but I still wouldn't accept it. I think a wide receiver in the first round, to me, that would be, it's not like, at least with Jahmyr, you can see the vision. You're like, okay, David, you signed him. He's a really good back, but he's not like a top tier running back. He's just really good. You pair him with Jahmyr, like you can kind of see it. Jared needs a good run game. He benefits just like any quarterback. Like you can kind of see it. A wide receiver, like you got JMO for 2 years. Like you could just take one next year in the first round if you really wanted to. He wouldn't have really an impact at all the first 2 years. I get what you're right. It doesn't matter. It's best player available. But I'm looking at this draft, and I don't think it'll happen, because there'll be some good players on a defensive line and offensive line that you could argue best player available. But then again, Brad had Ennis Rakestraw as one of his top corners, and he got him in round 2. So who knows, Doc? But I would be upset. But would I be shocked? No, if I'm being honest. We've covered the Lions long enough. Nothing would shock me at this point. Nothing.
Is the only player you think about is Emeka Egbuka? Is he the only receiver that if he fell or make a move for it in the early 20s to get up there, would you do it for that particular player?
So, I've been hearing a lot about Luther Burden, the wide receiver he's a guy that's going to go late draft, but he was a highly rated prospect last year. So there's another guy. It's like, what does Brad think of him? He's supposed to have a even bigger year this year and didn't quite live up to that. And maybe his stock drops, but Brad's like, this guy is a special player. I like Egbuka. I think Egbuka is the type of player that's probably going to thrive in the NFL in the slot. And they're based on who they're bringing in to talk to, like Isaac TeSlaa, which I know we'll get to, these bigger body guys. I don't know if Egbuka would be the I guess the fit they're looking for, but he's going to be a really good player. So if you're going to take one in the first round later in the draft, it'll be between Egbuka, Luther Burden, because I think Matthew Golden, McMillan, those guys will be gone. But when you're really looking at this class, Doc, you're going to look back and see some really good players taken in rounds 2 and 3. I don't think this wide receiver class isn't like booming with a bunch of talent. So I think from 28 to that second round, there'll be a couple guys that you really like. Trey Harris from Ole Miss. I know you guys have wrote about him on Sports Illustrated. I've seen some articles, but there's going to be some good options. But those two, I'm not looking at those guys like, give me Luther Burden or Emeka Ibuka. I just don't think they're that level personally.
No, you're absolutely right. I just think that there's so many weapons for the Lions, so many mouths to feed already,
right,
to integrate somebody. But I do think that where legitimately you could look is undrafted free agents. I think that when the draft is over, I do think that, we'll preview later on as well, later round wide receivers at Lions on SI. Most people will understand that probably at that spot, when you look at which position the Lions could go at on day 1, day 2, day 3, day 2, day 3 priorities are probably more in line with wide receiver because it's a luxury position. But I think it's a great point that you got to find a Jameson Williams replacement. You got to go younger. You got to find a little bit more affordability at some skill positions. But like most people, got to ask you, do you parlay what Dan Campbell said about getting younger at wide receiver as, hey, maybe they go out and get a speedy, top-end, top-flight wide receiver to replace Jameson Williams?
I think it's something you have to consider. And people get frustrated when I bring up the potential departure of Jameson. But if you listen to what Brad and Dan talked about getting younger, but Brad saying how they're going to pick up the 5th year. But whenever Brad's asked about players like Panay or Amon-Ra, it's like, those guys are foundational players. We're not letting them go. We're going to get them to. For JMO, it's more like, we're going to pick up that 5th year. And I don't think that's shade at JMO, like he's not a good player or there's question marks. I just think it's the reality that Brad understands that if JMO goes out this year and next year and puts up back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, this dude's going to get close to $30 million per year. And unless you turn that salary cap button off on Madden, you're not paying for all these players. It's nearly impossible. So I think, to your point, it is smart to think about a potential replacement. Now, the hardest thing about replacing JMO is just the speed. I mean, he's one of the fastest players in the NFL. You can't just go pick a guy off a college roster and be like, all right, run. We've seen guys break the 40 record and just don't amount to anything. John Ross did it. Xavier Worthy did it, and he's pretty good. But J-Mo's up there. I mean, he didn't run at the combine, but he can run like the best of all time. So that's going to be the I guess the difficult part of this. I mean, there's a guy named Kyle Williams from Washington State. He's a burner, and a lot of people are talking about him. So it's tough. You're not going to get a guy as fast as J-Mo. You're just not. But what you're hoping to get is someone that can give you wide receiver 2 production. And I've said this before. I think it's easier to find a wide receiver 2 that can put up wide receiver 2 production. I'm not saying be as fast as J-Mo, than it is to find a tight end that can get you 1,000 yards. That's hard to get in the NFL. There's not a lot of those guys, and Sam Laporta will be a little cheaper. So I think they'll replace him. My guess is either mid-round this year or next round earlier, but we'll see.
Understood. Now, the lists are coming out. Pre-draft, top 30. Now it gets all convoluted regarding official visits, but it's always good to pay attention to who the Detroit Lions are meeting with. You're getting names of, from the SEC, Auburn, Alabama. You're getting names from, predominant schools that Brad Holmes likes to target. But you recognize too that there are going to be players drafted that the Lions don't need to have official visits with. They've done their research. They know, but there are a handful of players that when you look at the trackers and you look at the lists of visits of those that have come in and met with the team, and you definitely see the list of, you see Josiah Stewart, a lot of the Michigan products are very much in line with coming in, especially at the local level, the local pro days. Of the names that you've kind of started to read about, who intrigues you maybe as later round picks that maybe could come in, day 2, day 3, that could come in and say, you know what? They could add some value and compete legitimately for a role, especially when you know that linebacker is going to have opportunities with Malcolm Rodriguez working his way back at defensive tackle as well, with Aleem McNeil being basically out until the second or third quarter of the season. There's opportunity, and backup safety if something should happen to Kirby Joseph or Brian Branch, offensive line. There's opportunities to compete for those spots. So this year, I think last year's draft kind of hinted at, okay, we're pretty set at where we are with the roster, and you're going to have to come in and maybe take a chance on a developmental player. But I think this year's class has more of a legitimate chance to compete, even at nickel corner or cornerback, should they decide to address the defensive backs in this year's draft. So from the names that you've seen kind of come in, who's caught your attention? Who are you, who are some of the draft crushes you're starting to see from the visits that have made their way to the Allen Park Performance Center?
So two that stood out to me, and they both play the same position, but I think they're both uniquely different. The first one is I would say the most interesting player in this entire draft. It's Shamar Stewart, and the fact that the Lions met with him tells you. And Brad values RAS score, and Shamar Stewart measurables everything. He's a freak of nature. I know Dan and Brad are both interested in. Okay, let's talk to this guy. Let's get to know him. Let's see what makes him tick, the way he plays football. Because when you look at him, again, measurables, everything, you're like, this guy should be dominant, and then you watch the tape and you see flashes of, wow, this guy is dominant. But then you see a lot of other times you're like, he doesn't stand out to you consistently. So I wonder with him, if there's a situation, because it's hard to kind of judge where he's going. I mean, I've seen him going top 17. I've seen him fall to the Lions. My biggest question, and I can't wait for the draft for this, is A, do you trade up? Is there a fear that he might be gone before 28? Maybe the Ravens take him right before you. Or B, if he is there, what do you do? I wonder if the Lions will pull the trigger on that, because you look at him, he is Davenport 6'6", 200 and something pounds, power guy. That's Shamar Stewart. That's the type of player they're looking for physically. Now, production, you'd start to look and be like, he doesn't have the production maybe, but they take a swing on a guy like that. I'm interested because they develop players really well, Doc, and I wonder what they could maybe turn Shamar Stewart into. That's probably one of the bigger questions I have. Since they met with him. And I know people have been talking about the whole top 30 visit thing. The Lions love drafting guys in the first round that they bring in on visits. They pull to that. Now, throughout the draft, it varies, but in the first round, if they meet with you, you're a consideration in the first round. So Shamar Stewart, the biggest question mark to me. And then Josiah, I'm curious with Josiah because he's very productive, played here locally. They've met with him, I think, virtually and top 30. So they clearly really like him. Local pro day, everything. He's a little smaller. Maybe he can play some Sam linebacker, or maybe just rush off the edge. He's another one where I think as the days go on, I'm starting to look at Josiah Stewart like that guy's going to be a Lion. That's just a feeling I have. They really like him, obviously. Comes from a great defense, some great players he played around him. But Josiah Stewart in the second, I'm almost like tending to lean that it will happen. And then I want to see what unfolds with Shamar Stewart. That's interesting to me.
Yeah, that's good. We're going to talk heavily about the edge rusher spot. So I want to get your sense of a couple names that have been linked to the Lions and that have been heavily debated. So I want to get your sense of this player because people are talking about him. If he's available, if he falls, James Pearce. If he's there, he seems to have a skill set that would be appealing to a lot of teams. And what stinks is that, as someone like you and I, who are definitely going to browse through all the mock drafts, even on X, all over the place, I keep seeing him being passed by the Lions and landing with the Eagles. And I'm like, that would be something if you pass on a guy with character concerns, all the scouts that are saying that lean towards saying, hey, he takes plays off, or there's opportunities where maybe he's not the culture fit that maybe the Lions would tend to gravitate towards. Then you see Howie Roseman, on some mock drafts, potentially taking a swing. And it does with a lot of these guys, does also depend on culture, depends on where they end up going. But you personally, you take a swing, he's there at number 28, he dips. Do you see him being a fit? Do you see him being somebody that, could come in under these parameters with Dan Campbell? How are you going to misbehave with Dan Campbell? I mean, literally he'll end your career before it starts in a lot of different ways. I don't see the risk as many people do, but at the same time, I do see where talent-wise you could get better. We'll talk about a couple names that have been linked to the Lions in a minute here, but James Pearce, you in or out?
I'm all in.
The pass rusher.
All in, Doc. And I know people look at the Eagles and say, oh, they have no morals. I mean, Howie Roseman just came out a couple weeks ago and said they don't touch prospects with a history of hurting women. So they have standards, but I mean, the guy's got a little bit of an attitude, some question mark. if James Pearce can come into your locker room and disrupt it, your locker room was never good to begin with. He's not going to do that. They have a strong now. Would I say taking a guy like this early on in the rebuild would be smart to build around him? It's a risk, but right now you have all these vets, you have good players, you have a culture, you have Dan Campbell, all these guys around him. Aiden will be with them, DJ Reader. Hopefully they bring back Za'Darius. That'd be a really good mentor for him. But right now, can they afford to make that pick? Yes, I think he'll thrive in Detroit. I think he'll pan out. So I'm all in on James Pearce.
All in smart. I think that, if the Lions do their research and they think football wise he can contribute, I would not be surprised if he's there at 28, that he would be a player that the Lions would potentially want to cultivate. Especially, look, you need talent. And sometimes there are going to be some guys that you bring in. You've done it before with Cam Sutton and guys that potentially don't exactly align, but they've been able to quickly move on when mistakes were made. But let's talk about two names that have been heavily mocked to the Lions at the edge rusher position. Two guys that I think could be potentially guys that end up being there at number 28, Nick Scourton or Donovan Ezeiruaki. Two guys that different skill sets, but are very much in line with what the Lions could like at number 28, that fill the position that they could come in and contribute. Especially, look, it's pretty much standard that most people believe that Marcus Davenport will be first on the depth chart, but the rookie will have a chance to earn snaps in a defense that's looking for pass rush help from anywhere. They're going to count on Levi Ezeiruaki, Josh Pascal to take a step up, but behind Marcus Davenport, that big-bodied, that type, Ezeiruaki is very intriguing. But at the same token, you also realize there's some guys as well that could be intriguing, like a player like Nick Scourton. Between those two, if they're available, who would you pick?
I like both of these guys. I think where I lean is probably in a similar mold to what Dan Campbell thinks when you're looking at both these guys. I mean, Nick and Donovan. Donovan's about 6'2", 6'1", a little smaller, about 250, but he can get after the quarterback. That's what he does. He's got long arms. He has all the moves in his arsenal. He talked about the ghost move at the combine. Like, I know when you were there, it has everything. But the problem is, what is he like against the run? That's what you're looking at. And I think that's where, for me, and I know Dan probably thinks the same way, can you defend the run? And that's where Nick Scourton comes into play because he's big. He can play the run. He can rush the passer. There was times at Texas A&M, I know the production wasn't like astounding, but the year before at Purdue, he had 10 sacks. He was up there in the Big Ten in sacks. And then he comes to Texas A&M and production dips a little bit, but they're doubling him at times. So I would lean Nick Scourton just because of the size and what he did at Purdue and what I think he'll do in the NFL, because someone commented this in our chat, and it's a great point. I didn't even think about this. I think it's top 5 or top 10. I can't remember which one it is. Of the NFL sack leaders are 260 or heavier. So when you look at that metric, size wins, Doc, in life too. So you know what? I'm all in on Nick Scourton on this between these two, even though I like both, but I would lean the bigger prospect with a higher ceiling, in my opinion.
No doubt. But Donovan's, you see him early. He showed up early in a lot of the mock drafts. The 16.5 sacks at Boston College definitely caught a lot of people's attention, man. Productivity. He was able to go out and do it. So it's going to be interesting to see, what I love when a draft happens is, yes, who the Lions pick, but also who's available and who they decide to pass on. Because, always the spots right behind, especially with the Eagles being there later after the Lions. If the Lions, it happened last year with the cornerback spot. The Lions got Terry Arnold and Ennis Rakestraw, and the Eagles went after them and were able to select different talents. So it's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out moving forward. All right, a couple of the names that we've saw that have been reported to have or will have a meeting with the Lions. I want to get your sense of this player first because of Brad Holmes' love for Alabama players. What are your thoughts on Q Robinson meeting with the Lions? And you get a sense that he's, there's now a little bit of a debate whether he could be a day 2 pick, as some would report, or maybe because of his special teams prowess coming after an injury, could he be a day 3 pick? I think it's interesting. Many people believe that, he might be overall undersized to be a prototypical edge, could end up being a Sam linebacker with some more special teams. I think he's interesting because of that injury history. Clearly, we joke around about that a little bit. But I do think talent-wise, when we saw that name, I said, you know what? He does kind of fit the mold of somebody that could come in as a Jalen Reeves-Maben type that could develop under Calvin Shepard.
Yeah, he is intriguing. I mean, I saw the report from you guys, and then I started looking more into it. He was a 4-star prospect coming out. I know the size is kind of is like you brought up. It's like he's kind of a tweener where, like you said, he's big. He's 6'4", 6'5", but he's about 240. Probably got to up the weight a little bit to really play edge. So he probably would play that Sam linebacker role. But the thing that intrigues me, and I'm sure intrigues Brad, is, you get a guy value coming off an injury, but also he can play special teams. And he was a big time special teamer at Alabama. They used him heavily. And then this past year, I think he had like 4 sacks in 8 games or something like that. So I think for just to add to this defense, I mean, we know how much the Lions value all 3 phases: offense, defense, and special teams. Seems like Q would be kind of a perfect mid to late round guy. Maybe if he does fall mid round, that you can go ahead and grab, and the Lions would just kind of figure it out. Like you said, you have Calvin Shepard now as defensive coordinator. Well, you've seen what he's done with linebackers. Imagine what he could do with a guy this big, playing special teams. And I think that has some upside left, even with the injury. I think they're still, I don't think that phases, we've seen, it doesn't really phase Brad too much with that stuff. So I'm intrigued by Q Robinson. I'm on board with it.
No doubt. And then the other as well is Isaac TeSlaa. He's going to meet next week, I believe, with the Lions. One of those players that you've said. I think that I agree with you and a lot of others that say probably the younger pick in terms of a wide receiver will be a big-bodied receiver, because you got to replace Allen Robinson, who most likely is going to retire. Donovan Peoples-Jones did not work out. And, I do think that some added depth behind, should something happen to Tim Patrick, who's the clear number 3, I think you want to be able to add that. I think that's an intriguing name. I think the skill set makes it so that, he could come in and fit maybe relatively quicker with Jared Goff, should he be given an opportunity. But it's been interesting because the Lions have tried to solve that riddle. They went with a vet in Tim Patrick, who was coming back from injury. By all accounts, that worked out in 2024. You bring him back. I do like the deal that he's been given in regards to what he can bring to the table offensively. But in regards to a draft pick, do you like what TeSlaa could bring to this team if they went out and made an investment in him as a draft pick?
Yeah, I don't mind it. I'm starting to get more and more information about Isaac TeSlaa. I know Lucas has been big on Isaac TeSlaa. He loves him. He obviously from Michigan, went to Division II, transferred to Arkansas. And even in that Arkansas offense, which they don't, quarterback play's not great. They're not throwing the ball, slinging it all over the field. He was one of their most productive wide receiver, but a very reliable target. And honestly, I didn't even know how big he was. I had to look up. I just saw the numbers, and then I actually look. He's 6'3.5", 6'4". He's big. He tested dang near perfect on the RAS score, which again, bonus points for Brad Holmes. But to your point, he fits the mold of kind of the Tim Patrick receiver. He's a contested catch guy. He ran like a 4.40, so he's got the speed. I think for Isaac, it depends, I guess, where he's going. I'm comfortable taking a guy like this. I think he's more of a guy that'll make more of an impact year 2, year 3. I don't think right away you'll start to see Isaac TeSlaa just explode onto the scene. But if it's a guy you really believe in this system can develop and take over that Tim Patrick role, I'm open to it. There's other guys I like Pat Bryant too from Illinois, another bigger body guy. So he fits the mold, John, of being that big body downfield threat for Jared Goff. Yeah,
funny if they draft him, I'm going to definitely for sure, or at least one time, butcher capitalizing the S and then just put TESLA. I mean, come on.
2 A's. Yeah.
Exactly. I had to look it up before I put the banner up, how to pronounce his name and say it correctly. It's like, oh my.
Well, we were at the combine. His family was all around us. They all had TeSlaa, actual TeSlaa, Elon Musk TeSlaa cars on the back of their shirt. And they had TeSlaa across their thing. So they were supporting him at the combine. It was awesome to see. And then I find out he's from Michigan. So from the mitten. So shout out to Isaac TeSlaa.
Exactly. I love the look to see who the Lions have been bringing in locally, giving opportunities to, especially from Michigan State. We're able to look at players that can come in. And that local day, I think, is great to give local guys opportunities, just get a taste of what it's like. All right, with our remaining few minutes here, we're joined by Jeff Iafrate, Crunch Time Sports, doing great things on the digital airwaves, and has an evening show, nighttime, each and every night, 8 to 10. Find it on YouTube. Wednesday night, 8:45 is my favorite segment of the show, where there's great opportunities to talk to the fellas about all things that are going on with the Detroit Lions. But now last question for you. There's going to be, probably some wheeling and dealing. Brad Holmes right now, the Lions feature, I think, 7 picks across the landscape all 3 days. They could maneuver in spots where they don't have a pick. But for you, when the day's done, after those 3 long days of drafting and adding talent to this roster, what should the Lions' goals be for this 2025 draft?
I think the first one for me would find an immediate impact player as a pass rusher. You have to find someone that can impact the game immediately. And notice I said that instead of first round or second round, because if you want to take a guard at the first, you can still find a pretty good player in the second, but you got to get someone that can contribute right away for you. And you can also find someone that can contribute right away and be best player available. It doesn't have to be both. Just no more projects until you're getting later in the draft, and then you can decide what you want to do. So I think the number one goal should be finding an immediate impact as a pass rusher. And then the second thing is you got to walk away with some depth at offensive line. I think there's some question marks there. Now, you lost Kevin Zeitler and Mahogany steps up. But after that, like if Frank goes down, let's say Graham has to play center, you're sitting there at guard going, okay, is Giovanni Manu stepping in? So I think they have to find some immediate help at edge that can impact the game right away for you in a Super Bowl run. And then the second one to me would be find offensive line depth. And it could be left tackle. Unless they like Giovanni, then go guard or go center. So maybe Graham can stay at guard. They just need a little more depth there at center, in my opinion. But at the offensive line, in my opinion. But those are the two things, John. If they walk away and they accomplish those two things, I'm not as picky with the other positions or when they take other guys. I'm not. But those two things I desperately want as a Lions, someone who covers the Lions and as a Lions fan.
No doubt. Always enjoy talking ball. Half hour flies by, but I knew I wanted to get Jeff back on, making another appearance here on the Lone Wolves podcast. I just get a sense that, Jeff is somebody that definitely locked into the draft, paying attention. Definitely one of the great young broadcasters out there doing great things on the digital landscape, and definitely knows his stuff. And to pick his brain about the draft gives me insights as well as to what people want to invest in, look at. And you're absolutely right. It's been edge heavy, but at the same token, talking about some of those skill positions, I just think it's fair to introduce that idea. Would it be something that happens? I would be surprised. But at the same token, the joy of talking ball is you got to be open to Brad Holmes doing a lot of different things, especially when he says, I feel like the Lions have been pretty fair in their discussion of things. And they say, we don't really have to be, at this point in time, coming up a 15-win year, a needs-based team. But right. You do realize the edge rusher is a spot you want to have depth, and you can never, ever, and Brad said it, you can never, ever have enough pass rush help. One last thing. Have you closed the door on Trey Hendrickson? Is it over?
It's over.
It's over. I believe so too.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, the capital, I'm interested to see. I want to see him traded because I want to see what he'd go for. That's what I'm interested in. And then you got to give him the extension. I don't think it's happening. I thought Myles Garrett, there was a chance because I wasn't sure if he was as, I guess, obsessed with the extension. We found out that's all a lie. He wanted the money. But at the time, I'm like, maybe he'll play with 2 years left. Yeah, the extension thing ain't going to work, John. You can't pay two guys $40 million.
It's tough. It's tough. But it's one of those deals where if you're going to make that push, maybe you are doing something a little bit different. Most Super Bowl teams don't draft 2 cornerbacks as rookies and have opportunities to play them. And so, you realize sometimes you got to do outside the box things. But I do think that draft and develop has been a great model for the Lions so far. But let's see how they tweak it in regards to what they select and how they utilize the draft as well. And maybe in upcoming weeks, we'll discuss online or when we talk again, opportunities maybe that they could trade or players that could move on for more assets, or maybe using draft picks to acquire more proven talent. So there's more wheeling dealing that could be done by the Detroit Lions. That's what makes it fun. Make sure you pay attention to Jeff and Crunch Time Sports. Follow us here on Twitter at Detroit Podcast and Lions on SI. Thanks everybody for tuning in to the latest Detroit Lions Lone Wolves podcast. Look forward to checking in the future.